the chat feature. So please feel free to go about and do that. That's going to be towards the end. So a little bit of Q&A, a little bit of lecture, and a little bit of actually heavy on the storytelling. And stories are very important when we talk about anything that we're trying to make major societal change or personal change or anything like that, social justice, because when we do that, when we tell stories, it allows certain synapses in the brain to fire differently. But it also, like, when we talk about taboo subjects like mental health, which shouldn't be, but they are, no longer is it they and them, but with stories, it's we and us. We can connect together individually and collectively. We can connect to the topic and to what we need to do. So before I get into all of that, though, I want to take a couple of well-placed tangents to start out. So I guess that's called a preface. But I remember, first of all, like when this all hit, like when we all became super aware of it. I'm living in Philadelphia now, but I was living in California, in Los Angeles at the time. And so we went on lockdown around the 14th, the 15th of March. And I remember feeling, oh my God, like I started to kind of freak out internally and a bit externally as well. And I was having a hard time, and my throat was in my, I'm sorry, my stomach was in my throat all the time. And it was a couple of weeks. And I finally realized, I was like, oh my gosh, Josh, you live with generalized anxiety disorder, first of all. So what you're going through is probably triggering that to then sort of spike, right? So I had a conversation with a friend of mine about this, and I was like, dude, yo, listen. And so we were on the phone, and I was like, I was explaining what was going on with my anxiousness and my anxiety. And he was like, oh my God, I'm feeling that too. And then he went on about his stuff. And it was this really interesting moment because neither of us had really spoken about it to anyone else at that point. But we both confirmed to one another that we both felt quite a bit better after having disclosed and talked about these things and like strategies and what to do and how to move about our day. So that connectivity was really interesting. But there was something else that he said at one point that gave me notice, that gave me a second to pause. And he was like, well, and he was talking about everything he was going through, but then he was like, at least I'm not having it as bad as so-and-so. And it was like a group of people. I can't remember exactly who it was, but he's like, at least I'm not having it as bad as so-and-so. And I took a second. I was like, bro, like that should be a point of gratitude, but don't like be grateful that you don't have it as badly as so-and-so. But on the same time, don't use that as a point to mitigate your feelings and what you're going through. Don't devalue your experience just because you don't have it as hard as somebody else. Like we should allow ourselves. So I say that because I hear that a lot, like, and it could be around COVID. It could be around a medical condition. It could be around a difficult day. And you're like, well, at least I don't have it as bad as this or that. I'm like, for sure, that could be a point of gratitude, but that should not be something to say, well, then I don't get to feel what I'm feeling, or I don't get to have these emotions or these experiences. Because listen, like, and same goes for me. Like, I will never be able to live in anyone else's brain or have anyone else's experiences. All I can do is walk the journey that I'm in and live in the brain that I'm in. And so I don't know how much more severe or less severe definitively what I have versus what somebody else has. But what I can do is sort of live in that, lean into those emotions. And then also that point of gratitude then allows maybe for that difficult time, suffering, obstacle to sort of lessen the impact. But we all need to allow ourselves to feel what we're feeling. Anger, sadness, fatigue, brain fog, mourning, grieving, relief. Some people might even be feeling something that feels more positive, and then you might feel guilty that you're feeling that way. Whatever you're feeling, like, let's lean into it, let's own it, let's explore it, because our emotions and what we're going through are trying to teach us a lesson. They're trying to help us move through whatever it is that we're moving through, good, bad, ugly, right? So that's one piece. The other thing is this, right? And so I've been through personally, and then I'll get into the storytelling and do everything I promised to do. But I've been through a lot of things in my life, suicides in my family, homicide, 2 mental illnesses that I live with. I've taken care of a former partner who had cancer. And so I've been through a lot. And the first time I was really, really cognizant and aware of a very big obstacle in my life was age 25, 11 years ago, when I lost my dad to suicide. And so over the course of the next couple of years, I had a very difficult time, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But when I'd say about 18 months after I lost my dad, maybe a little longer, maybe it was like 22 months, I was talking with a friend, and I was sort of in my bitch and moan phase. Like I was just so upset and having a hard time. I was like, why me? Why me? Why me? And my friend was super cool, and we unwrapped that together. Now, the same friend also was like, let me pose this to you. What if instead of saying, why me? How could this happen to me? How about you take on the mindset? And this would be a choice, Josh. And so I present this choice to you as well. But this friend of mine said, what if you change that mindset or worked on that mindset to say, everything is happening for me and not to me? And that's a choice, right? So if everything is happening for me and not to me, then I have a choice to try to glean some kind of lesson or glean some kind of like way to level up or to learn something or to move through things differently, right? So I took on that mindset about 11, maybe 10 and a half years ago. And since then, I've been through some very difficult times in the past decade. And yet, I now have these transferable skills that I learned from these really stupid, horrible, ugly at times situations. And I'm able to use them and apply them to COVID and apply them to this time period that we're living. And the reason that I say that is because, yes, for sure, like we need to own what's happening, and it sucks. And we get to have our bitch and moan period. We get to mourn, we get to feel our feelings, but we also get a chance to, if we choose to, flip that and say, oh my gosh, like what are the things that I could be learning? What are the new skills? How can I learn? And like for me, I'm learning how to be still better. I'm learning how to work more efficiently. I'm learning how to give back virtually and in different ways, not just in person. I'm learning about my value systems. I'm learning about so many different things that I would not necessarily have been aware of and learned of had this situation not come about. Don't want this to happen, don't want it to continue, but at least I have a choice, that everything is happening for me and not to me. And so hopefully, we can take on that mindset collectively. And so when the next thing comes, and it will, hopefully it's not as nasty as COVID. Hopefully it's a stub toe or a bad test grade, but whatever it is, we can move through it and be like, oh my gosh, I remember that time 5 years ago when I went through COVID and like I used this and this to cope and move through. Oh my God, I had success. I can use that to then move through whatever this situation and scenario is. So wanted to sort of take that time as to give a preface to the session that we're about to have. So we're talking mental health, how to live mentally well and crush it during difficult times. I'm gonna have some coffee and spill it on my lap. That's just what happened. So so I'm gonna tell a little bit of my story. And so here we go. So I grew up in New Jersey. Please don't hold it against me. It's not my fault. But I grew up in central New Jersey as a middle kid of three, two parents who were together. And so a lot of people growing up, I think, thought that we had not all together, but a lot of it together. Like we had some good stuff happening in our world, and we looked good, I think, from the outside, other than the fact that we were very ensconced in poverty and we didn't have two nickels to rub together. We were, from where I come from, it was very important in central New Jersey, in the community that I grew up in, to be super involved in church. And so that's something that was important to my family. I wouldn't say that's super important to me now. I express that faith and that spirituality in different ways. But then, like, we went to 5 services a week. I went to school there. My dad was a deacon. They sang. We were there all the time. And then my family also was involved in community marches and rallies and things like that. And so people looked at us and were like, wow, this family's got it going on. Yet we had some big secrets in my family. One of them was that my father, even though he was the deacon and super involved, my father was an abuser. He was neglectful. He was emotionally abusive with his 3 kids and his wife, my mother, and he was physically abusive with me. And I don't want to go too much in depth into this, but any form of abuse, neglect, physical, emotional, sexual, anything very traumatic before 18, but really before the age of 25, 26, 27, when the brain is done developing, can have a profound effect on one's mental health and wellness. And I bring that up because it did for me, for sure. And so that's part of my journey. I didn't really own these things until a couple of years ago. And this is the guy who talks about mental health. And this is the guy who's very in touch and in tune, I think, and self-aware. And I can always be better and do better, for sure. I'm by no means perfect, far from it. But once I started to learn about that, the abuse and its effect on one's mental health and wellness, for that it can have an effect for a lifetime, I started to look at my current situation and past situations with a different lens. So I was able to forgive myself for these decisions that I made, especially in adulthood, that were, at times you could look back and say that was bad or unhealthy or messed up, but really what it was me coping as I would have as a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year old, but I was using those coping mechanisms that I would have used as a child to protect myself from my abuser. I was using it and projecting it onto other people in other situations that no longer served me. So I could have a sense of self-forgiveness. I could have a sense of empathy. I could have a sense of like, I can then switch and shift gears in my head and choose differently. So I say that because 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 or 5 men. I mean, the statistics are a little vary depending on the kind of abuse, but a good portion of us have experienced some kind of traumatic event or abuse before the age of 18, before we step foot on a college campus. And so just to sort of plant that seed so we can maybe take ownership of that at some point, maybe not now, but in the future. The other big secret that my family had was that my father's father, my grandfather, died by suicide in the 1960s. My dad at the time was almost 18 and his dad was almost 50, and it was long before I was born. And so that was something we kept a secret in the home. My dad didn't even want his kids to know. And when I was about 12 and my sister was 13, my mom pulled us aside, and my brother was quite a bit younger, so he didn't get this information. But I think she was trying to explain to us why my dad was so grumpy and abusive and angry. And she explained to us briefly that my grandfather died by suicide. And that was really it. It was sort of like, don't tell your dad, because we knew what that would mean. Like we would have, gotten hurt or hit or emotionally abused or something of that nature. So we kept it quiet. And I learned something that day. And it wasn't something, and so my brain, does funny things sometimes. And it certainly did that day when I was 12. I deduced from that conversation that if something bad in life happens, whatever it is, if you feel like you can't handle it, keep it a secret. And of course we can't do that. I took that lesson, that erroneous lesson, with me for a very long time. And in fact, I had 2 health conditions I was living with at the time I didn't know about. And I didn't know about it because I didn't talk about it. I didn't see anyone else talk about it. And it would manifest itself in my behavior and in a lot of different ways that I just was unaware of. And I didn't get officially diagnosed until about almost age 28 with these conditions. And I could remember having symptoms as young as like 8 years old. And so these 2 health conditions that I was living with, I should just tell you, one is called clinical depression and the other is called generalized anxiety disorder. And you're like, whoa, wait a minute, Josh, I thought you said health conditions. I did, because they are health conditions. Your brain is an organ, your heart is an organ, your pancreas, I think your pancreas is over here. I'm not really sure. I'm a speaker, not a biology major. So, but all these are organs, right? And yet we treat that like your body, like there's some like line on your neck and below it is your body and above it is some funny magical thing we can't talk about it. That's not the case. You've got a machine up here, a powerful machine, and even a car. Let's maybe we're a lot of us, some of you are driving around a nice Maserati, some of you are Rolls Royce, some of you an old beat up Geo Metro. None of my business, but we've got this fine-tuned machine up here and we've got to treat it properly and differently than the way we have been in the past. Right. And so these are conditions of the brain. And I got to tell you, like briefly, my depression, because we don't know what that looks like. We don't know what that means. First of all, mental illness is not the same as mental health. A mental illness can affect your mental health, but mental health is also, being on a Zoom call and learning about stuff like this. Mental health is going for a walk. Mental health is saying no to a friend when they're or a loved one when they're giving you a hard time, and it's time to set a boundary. There's a lot of ways that mental health manifests itself, but it's not just about how screwed up we are. It's not that at all, right? But my mental illnesses, in fact, they look different, and they look different on different people. On me, I've gotten to know my depression and anxiety, but my depression so well that I sometimes think about it like boxing, right? I'm boxing with a sparring partner, and I know my sparring partner so well at this point. I've known my sparring partner intimately well for about 8 years now. And so sometimes I can see my sparring partner throwing a jab at my nose and trying to break it, my depression, and I'm able to duck, or move out of the way, and it grazes me on the cheek instead of my nose. And so that means I'm able to mitigate my symptoms. I'm able to lessen the severity of what I go through. Because my depression kind of manifests itself. If you can see my arm, if you can see the screen, You know, if this is somebody's normal mood right here, this line, right? Mine is just a little bit below. It's this little nagging thing, right? And so I know how to, at this point, I know how to hack the chemicals in my brain through exercise and food and counseling therapy and doing things that boost my dopamine and serotonin levels. And we all have that opportunity to manage our situations, be it mental illness or whatever, right? We all have the opportunity to lessen severity of the things that we're going through. And in fact, my depression and my anxiety are not just, and they're not really enemies anymore. In fact, sometimes they're my superpowers because I can use them and turn them on their head and have big, deep, meaningful conversations all over the US, all over the world, and help people and take my pain and repackage it, present it to somebody else and say, I hope you don't suffer and go through the difficult things that I went through. You know, so we have that opportunity as well. We have that choice. Everything is happening for me and not to me, right? So we have an opportunity to make meaning out of difficult situations, be they mental illness or anything else. It's a choice. You have that choice. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm just presenting you with information. Take what you like, leave the rest. Back to the story, fast forward a little bit, age 19, I decided it's time to leave home. I did a year at community college and I stayed at home and I was like, I got to get out of here. So I became a professional actor in New York City. And I was, you know, doing Broadway stuff and singing and acting, like legit, you know, like actual professional stuff and voiceovers. And I started writing for the theater. And that's basically still what I'm still a writer. I don't really perform anymore unless it's voiceover work. And so I was doing that up for a while actually. And then up to age 24, 25. Now my parents finally break up. My mom leaves my dad, and which was a long time coming. And so we thought my dad would have maybe been violent or kind of taken some time off. But he ended up taking this downward spiral pretty quickly. And none of us really had vocabulary around mental health or suicide or anything like that. And he ended up taking his life. He ended up dying by suicide the day they were supposed to finalize their divorce, which would have been March 31, 2009. So about 11 years ago. And I didn't like my dad, but I loved him. And I didn't want to see him suffer the way that he was suffering. And I didn't know how to help him at the time. I know now what, you know, some of the actions and activities that we could have done, but, you know, I now use that information to help other people. And that's the meaning that I could make of that situation. But over the next 20 months after losing my dad, it was a really trying time in my life because my professional life was taking off, but my personal life was taking a nosedive. You know, professionally, you know, acting and writing were going really well. I was back in school as well. Personally though, my dad died, you know, of course, as you know. My mom, who had always kind of been the decent, kind, normal parent, more or less sued me and my brother and sister for the inheritance that my dad left us. And my girlfriend of 6 years, who I'd lived with for 5.5, left me as well because I wasn't really a good partner at the time and shouldn't really have been with anybody. And so, but I lost 3 major people all at one time, and that was very, very difficult for me. As it could be for anybody, just having all that turmoil and changeover and chaos. And at the same time, I was living with these 2 undiagnosed health conditions, depression and anxiety, and I didn't know about it. Some of the symptoms were a bit out of control. And I started the beginning of 2011. I was 26. I was a month and a half shy of my 27th birthday. And I started thinking that nobody loved me or cared about me and the world would be better off if I weren't in it. Now that wasn't true, but I was unwell. We talk about back aches and knee aches. I was having a psych ache because it was totally treatable and manageable. And I just didn't know it at the time. Luckily, the middle of February, I ended up reaching out to the last person in the world that I wanted to speak to. I ended up calling a family member, my mom. And then from there, that kind of planted a seed that like I could get more help and there'd be more hope and healing. And it was still a very difficult process. I ended up engaging in my universities, my college's counseling center, and then a variety of activities, coping mechanisms, helping other people, reaching out to friends, people who I knew, people I didn't know, volunteering. And there were so many different things. It took me about 9 months to feel like me again. But as I was going through that process, one of the things that really resonated with me was that to feel whole again, I needed to really engage in in taking care of my mental health and wellness. And that's where we sort of jump off of the story piece a bit and we move a little bit more towards SlideShare and talking about some of these concepts, because we don't really know, as a society, what mental health actually means and what it's all about and how to talk about it. case in point, I was, I'll share my screen in just a sec, but you know, as you see this slide here, like what is mental health? It's a person's psychological and emotional well-being. It's how we handle the ups and downs of life. I mean, even just our vocabulary is so off. Like I was taking an Uber when I was living in LA about a year ago, and it was like 4 a.m, and I was going to do a speaking gig somewhere. I can't remember where. And my Uber driver wanted to know what I did for a living. And I just kind of, you know, and I talk about mental health and suicide prevention and that stuff. And I just wanted to give him a brief answer because it was 4 a.m. I didn't really want to talk. And so I was like, I talk about mental health, and that like opened up the floodgates. And so he was like, oh, mental health, that sure is going around. And I was like thinking to myself, like, sir, it's not the common cold, you know, it's not going around. Everybody has mental health, right? And that's what I think he was confusing it with mental illness. And even then, I mean, these are things that people have been living with for centuries, millennia, and we're just getting better and better about talking about them and how to understand and deal with them, right? So bottom line, mental health is a person's psychological and emotional well-being. It's not necessarily debilitating. As I, you know, said previously, it's not exclusive as being an illness or a disorder. Certainly not a character flaw or a weakness. I know, again, that I think that to me goes back to the idea that mental health and mental illness are one and of the same, and they're not. But even still, like mental illness, like I wouldn't call that a flaw or a weakness either. In fact, for me, I mean, some days and some weeks, like I hate it. It sucks. Like I wish I didn't have to manage and deal with it, but I got it. I've got those things. And so, you know, I'm able to turn them on their head. I feel like they're points of strength because they've almost kind of forced me to move through life in a different manner, to be more empathetic to the world, to the people around me, to others and myself, and just how to move through life with resiliency and a certain amount of strength and dignity. So for me, I think some of the strongest people I know are those who are actively working through and managing and living with mental illnesses. You know, certainly mental health affects everybody, disorder or not, right? It's a little different for everyone. Like I'm never going to tell you that you have to do this one thing or another. Like make sure you go on your yoga retreat or deep breathing. You know, I mean, those are good for some people, but I was having a conversation earlier today about some of these sort of tried and true methods that are just these sort of blanket things that they'll tell you to do as college students of what to do for your mental health. Some of that works and some of that's not, but it's not all good for everybody, right? So I kind of cringe when I see like the BuzzFeed stuff, like 15 ways to affect your mental health. Like, no, like it's those are good, but we also have to, you know, qualify that with it's back to the slide. It's a little different for everybody. It takes time and energy to develop for sure. Because I mean, I'm even learning stuff about my own mental health and wellness now. I've been very active in mine and others as well for, you know, 8, 9, 10 years now, and I'm learning stuff about my own that like I've learned a lot about my anxiety during the times of COVID and a few other things that, and just how to move through that and work through that, and just general health and wellness as well. Like I didn't know I liked sitar music and that makes me feel better when I'm having a bad day. Is it weird? I don't know. Maybe it's different, but I figured that out. That's you know, that's one element of my mental health that I learned about. Let me go to this next slide, and this is important. This kind of goes back to vocab and like us, you know, collectively maybe not really understanding what we're dealing with, because I hear people at times, right? And this is sort of an arbitrary example, like, oh man, I stubbed my toe. The Braves lost. The Braves aren't losing, guys, right now. They're doing pretty well. But, you know, I stubbed my toe. The Braves lost, and my girlfriend yelled at me, and I'm so depressed. And I'm like, I'm willing to sit with that person and have that conversation and be present. But chances are you're probably not experiencing depression. You're probably experiencing a bad day. And so the reason why it's important to understand, like, am I experiencing a bad day? Is this a situational crisis, trauma, difficulty? Or is this something that's chronic that I'm living with every day, or that rears its head, you know, on a regular basis? Because then we know how to deal with it and manage it and move through it. And if we know what we're dealing with, then we can pick the right coping mechanism or skill. Like not every difficult situation, you know, requires yoga, and not every difficult situation requires counseling. there's different levels of things, right? And so if you can see the screen, like on the left of all these 3 meters, I guess you'd call them, is the color yellow. And that to me means peace and calm, and things are kind of going just fine. And then as you move to the far right, that's, if you're seeing the same colors I am, a dark orange, and that's probably chaos and difficulty and crisis. And so for me, back in 2011, especially the beginning of that year when I was in crisis, all 3 of these meters were reading in the dark orange area, right? So any of these can be moving to any color at any different time. So that's why it's really important to sort of check in with self and be like, what am I dealing with? What am I living with? What's going on? And it's just a healthier way to move through life. And it's why we need coping mechanisms and skills. So then once we sort of, to a degree, self-diagnose, but we're not really doing that, but just sort of like understanding a little bit more what's happening, then we can pick the next appropriate coping skill. And coping skills are just different tools that help us manage the things that life throws our way. And I would venture to guess that all of us on this Zoom, whether you're watching the recording or if you're here with us live, that you have at least been unintentional about coping skills. You know what kind of soothes you and makes you feel good and feel better. And then some of us are intentional about certain things as well. And that's a healthier response. There's some awareness around that, and that's always nice. But either way, you have used a coping skill, and there are unhealthy coping skills for sure. I'm going to talk only really about the healthy side of things, because that's really where I want to keep my focus in the context of this session. Coping skills to me are like, I remember, so when I was a kid, I was a big gamer for like a year and a half. Like there was like a period of time where I really loved video games, and then I realized like I get addicted to them, and you'll never see me for weeks at a time. So I kind of had to put that away. But when I was a kid and playing a lot of video games, we had these cheat codes, and I'm sure they still have them, but cheat codes for these video games. And so then you could beat the level faster or beat the bad guy quicker, have different tools and all that stuff, right? So to me, that's what coping skills are. They're like the cheat codes to life: up, up, down, B, Y, left, right. Like I'm able to skip a level. I'm able to, I don't have to repeat that unhealthy pattern anymore. I get to do COVID differently. I get to do life a little bit differently. So that to me is a little bit of what coping skills mean. The healthy side, they're different for everybody, right? There's no one size fits all. So like I said before, like I'm not going to tell you just to do this thing or that thing. There are going to be categories. I'm going to show some categories on the next screen that your coping skills will almost certainly fall underneath. And so, picking and choosing from those categories is going to be crucial. It's going to be very important. And this is a great time in life to experiment and to play around and figure out what works and what doesn't, and what coping skill works for what situation. They can be modified and changed at any time. I'd say a good portion of the skills that I was intentional about developing in 2011, I still use, but there's new ones, right? There's new methods to what I do. And so that's different kinds of volunteering. I'm 35, so not 36, so now I have a house plant. That's what you do in your 30s. So that's like a coping skill. I'm going to be, I cook, I'm going to start making my own wine. I check in with people. I'm volunteering. I'm doing different things that I didn't do in my mid to late 20s, right? So we have that opportunity to keep moving and doing differently. And I think that's really quite lovely. Like we get to grow as people alongside the coping mechanisms that we're growing as well. And of course, it takes time and energy to develop. Now, some of these categories, for sure, we need a healthy support system. By and large, that should be human. And that could be clergy, that could be counselor, that could be professor, that could be family and friends. That's a lot of different things. That could be your primary care physician, your doctor, right? It could also include your pets. It could also include your plants. But by and large, it should be somebody who can communicate back to us. Healthy distractions are always nice. And with any and all of these categories, a balance is key. Right. So we don't want to go overboard too heavily. I'm working on something that's taken me some time, thanks COVID, but this more or less like these categories, but calling them sort of the mental nutrition pyramid, because, just like the food nutrition pyramid, there's certain categories and you need a certain amount of X, Y, and Z, but you kind of can move things around and make things work for you depending on your body type and your brain type and things like that. So we don't want to go overboard on any one of these things, but sometimes I'm going to need more healthy distractions than relaxation. And sometimes I'm going to be more inclined to take on more service-based activities than, than maybe going out for a run. Right. So we got to mix and match and play a little bit. Right. So things you consume, I mean, you can see these categories. I don't have to read them off. And I think they're relatively self-explanatory as well. I want to bump to this next slide, and I'll explain it before I bump to it. But I get enough questions about my friend. Josh, my friend is having a hard time. How do I help them? What do I do? Right. And I say on here how to help a person in crisis. It doesn't have to. It could be varying levels of crisis. It could be varying levels of a difficult time. But the base of any help, first and foremost, actually before even listening, right? First of all, like letting somebody comes to you and asks for your help. I would first and foremost ask them how, right? Like, can I give you advice? Would you like me to listen, scream, yell, cry, play some ball? Like, what is it? How can I best be of service to you in that moment? Because a lot of times when people come to us for help or just to be heard and seen, we want to fix them. And we can't fix people. You can't do it. It's impossible. Nobody in the history of the universe has ever fixed another person. You can facilitate, you can't teach, right? So you can facilitate, you can't teach. That means that you ask big questions. You're in an advisory position. You're not the CEO. You're not the president of their life. So only they can take on any sort of activity for their own wellness, for their own health, right? We can't do that. So you can facilitate help, but you can't teach help. You can't force it upon somebody, right? So then from there, we're listening and listening and listening and listening some more. It's validating, it's empathetic, it's kind. When was the last time somebody listened to you for more than 30 seconds without chiming in or changing the subject so listening is so huge. And the clues to keep them grounded, that bullet point, that to me is more about coming from a strengths-based place, right? So they're having a hard time, and when it's your turn to speak, you want to let them know first that you see them and that you hear them, and you're validating. That's terrible. That's horrible. That sucks. Not in a dismissive way, but just like, wow, that must be really difficult. And wow, I want to really honor the fact that you're being so vulnerable right now and opening up to me. Like, I know that's got to be really hard. So I appreciate you. Like, there's ways to sort of validate and show somebody that you see them. You might even say something to the effect of, I know you may not see this right now, but the person that I'm viewing is strong and resilient and amazing and incredible. And, be honest, be genuine for sure. But we want to get to that place where somebody feels seen and heard and understood. We're not judging them. I think that's kind of self-explanatory. Empathy over sympathy and over pity, right? So empathy means I feel you versus I feel so bad for you, right? Be explicit how important they are to you. We can do that every single day. You don't have to wait for a crisis situation or anything like that. We can explain to the people in our lives just how cool and amazing and important they are. Making sure that they're safe, that's probably for more of a higher level crisis. So we're making sure that they don't have like a weapon or something they're going to harm themselves with. And of course, finally, assisting and referring to professional help is so important. And there's levels of help that we can engage in depending on the level of need. Now I'm going to put up some resources. And these are not Sussex resources. I know that says that, but it's not true. I changed out this slide earlier today. But you have some Kennesaw resources. You have the response to COVID-19. There's different things. The counseling services. I've got to know some folks in the counseling office, and they're amazing. They're pretty great. You're not going to vibe with everybody, right? Like you might. Like I felt very fortunate. Like when I first went to see my first counselor, I totally vibed with them and I was very fortunate. But I've also seen 3 others, and 2, like I'd say 1.5, but one of them is amazing. One of them wasn't the greatest, and one of them and then the 4th one I had to walk out of the office. I just wasn't feeling it. Like I felt like they weren't there for me, right? So not saying that you're going to find that to be the same case here, good, bad, ugly, but just to know that it's very relationship driven. And so, so we're not we're not supposed to necessarily get along with everybody or have an intimate connection with everybody. So just know that if you maybe like swing and miss on your first counseling session, try to swing again, maybe with a different person. That could be a possibility. The national hotline, of course, is right there, 800-273-8255. There's a crisis text line. These are, again, for higher level crises. And then we have some stuff too. I have some stuff for Black and brown people, and for for indigenous folks, Asian Pacific Islander, Latinx, because not everybody shares the same values and experiences that I have. Like, some of my stuff is universal and I've been through a lot, but not everybody has, case in point, like I went to Costa Rica a couple years ago, and my Spanish is pretty solid, but I don't think I'd be able to talk about, like, if I got hurt, like, I don't think I'd be able to tell somebody I broke my femur, or if I was spending a lot of time in country and I felt like I needed to see some counseling, some counseling services, I wouldn't really be able to talk about my high level emotions in Spanish. I'm just not that advanced in my language abilities there, right? So some people, like, for sure, like, their first language isn't English, and so we find them a therapist or help them find a therapist who speaks Japanese or speaks Spanish. But, like, also not everybody's language, like, if you can see me and you're watching the video, like, not everyone's language is mid-30s white guy either, So we got to honor people's experiences and how they want to be seen and heard, and how they want to show up in the world. And so that's why, and also not everything requires counseling, right? So you'll see some of these on the screen, like, they're more peer resources or they're informational resources. And so sort of, we just need to have the gamut ready to go, right? Here's some Latinx resources you can see, some Asian Pacific Islanders, some BIPOC stuff, and then the final, some indigenous resources, native stuff. And if you've missed any of this stuff, this is being recorded, and I'll kind of put it back on that. Excuse me, sorry, y'all. I'm just gonna leave it up on one, and then I'm gonna come back to, actually, I'm gonna stop sharing. I kind of boomered that situation for a second. So I want to challenge y'all as we're sort of winding down and moving to the Q&A. Thank you. So counseling.kennesaw.edu. Those resources will be posted, as well as video. So I want to challenge y'all, and I'll take this challenge with you. But it's a two-part challenge. And the first part is, it's a Gandhi quote. You probably all know it. It's probably even a little overdone, but I love it, and I want to provide some context. And so, one of my favorite quotes in the world is, be the change you wish to see in the world. And so, to me, that means if you don't like something, you change it. If you think it's always been a certain way, it hasn't. Why can't any of us watching live stream or recording, why can't any of us be the spark that lights the fire to change this world? But Josh, I'm 5'2" and I'm brown and I'm 19. Yo, we need 5'2", 19 and brown. Like, not everyone's going to listen to me. Like, a lot of people will, but I can't really, not everyone's going to, listen to my words, but they might listen to 19, 5'2" and brown, So we need that. Oh, Josh, I'll be somebody when I graduate. No, you're somebody now. We need you now. We'll need you when you graduate for sure, but we need you now. Like, we need your experiences now. Don't let anyone ever tell you that I'm big enough, tall enough, smart enough, pretty enough, smart enough, anything enough. You're more than enough to be the change that we need and that you need. The second piece is, tell your story. Tell it, speak up, speak out, speak often, tell that story. There's so much wisdom in the road that you have traveled and what you have been through. I don't care how old, how young, how abled or disabled or anything that you feel like is holding you back. Like, it's often the folks who feel like I have nothing to give who have the most to give, or have so much to give, right? And I've been in that place, where I felt like I didn't have anything worth sharing, and that's not the truth, and it's not the truth of any of you. Now, there's so much wisdom and power in your story, and in fact, I had a young lady who spoke to me after an event that I did in person. There was about 250 people in a room, and it was probably about a year and some change ago. And this young lady was like, Josh, I wanted to speak up during the Q&A and share my experience, but I didn't, because I felt awkward about it, and because what I've been through. And she spoke in a metaphor, but she was like, what I've been through feels like a hangnail, and what you've been through feels like this bloody open wound. And I was like, cool, I feel you. And we unwrapped that for a minute. And then she was like, and I was like, listen, I want to challenge you though, if you hear me out. And she was open to it. And so I said, next time you want to speak up, I encourage you to do so, because chances are there's a very good chance that there's other people in this room who have been through that hangnail and have gone through that, and who may be struggling, even though it feels like a hangnail, or maybe they're looking for support, or you're looking for support. So there's opportunity for loyalty, connection, friendship, new coping mechanisms and skills and different things like that. So you have this opportunity for that connection, 2, 3, 5, 10 people, who knows, right? So you have that opportunity. And also I told her this, I said, when I was 8, my depression was a hangnail. It was not deep and dark or anything like that, but because I let it go for 20 years, it became a bloody open wound. So that's another reason why we got to tell our story. So tell your story, speak up, speak out, speak often, be the change. Thank you so very much. Y'all appreciate it. And thank you for the kind words in the chat feature as well. Now we have some time for Q&A, right? So please, don't be shy, ask questions. I'm going to pop up. There's also something that I need to put up on the screen about people who attended. So I'm going to screen share that a little bit, maybe another 7-10 minutes, not all the way to the end, but closer to the end. I just want to sort of open up the floor for Q&A. Ask me anything, business life, mental health, suicide prevention, about your friend, about your family. There's no stupid questions or stupid answers. Just stupid people. No, there's not stupid people. That's not very nice. And you can ask privately too. You're welcome to do that. If you feel kind of uncomfortable or weird about asking a question. Okay. Oh, sweet. Okay. All right. Here we go. What should I do if my friend won't get help and I know they need help? Good question. So there's a couple ways to unwrap this. First of all, let's maybe take our ego out of it for a second. Maybe we're so close to that person that they feel awkward receiving our help. So it might be, hey, if you don't feel comfortable talking about this with me, is there somebody else you feel more comfortable talking to? And then see if they're willing to unwrap that, see where that part of the conversation goes, right? And then that might even lead to an opening in the conversation where they're willing to speak out a little bit more about what they're going through, right? The next piece is to normalize it, right? There's so many athletes athletes and different people in the world, musicians, artists, comedians who are talking about their mental health. So sometimes it's really nice to show people who are modeling the kind of behavior, that we want to see, right? From the people that we look up to, right? So it's really important to sometimes model that behavior. Kevin Love on the Cavaliers, and there's so many people out there, right? So sometimes if we know that somebody likes basketball, we could point them to Kevin Love. If we know somebody really loves Demi Lovato, you can point to Demi Lovato's talking about her mental health, right? The other piece, I get people say, Josh, I want my friend to get to counseling. That's another piece, right? This is a part of that question. I know my friend needs counseling. I've suggested they don't want to do it, right? So I congratulate them. That's an amazing thought process. I'm glad that you brought that up. My question to that person, who's the helper, who's the concerned person, is, have you been to counseling? And I'd say the answer I get back is 9 out of 10 times is a no. I'm like, well, I would encourage you as the friend, as the helper, to get to counseling, even if you feel you don't need it, because often when we want to see somebody display a certain kind of behavior, we need to display that behavior first ourselves. If you want somebody to be vulnerable, you need to be vulnerable yourself. If you want somebody to open up, you need to be open yourself. So we got to take on the behavior that we want somebody else to see. And from that place, from you going to counseling, it might help you discover some stuff about yourself. And it also, you could talk about sort of the logistics too. Be like, tell your friend, listen, show up 15 minutes before, fill out the paperwork, avoid this, go there, do this. This is the way to get there. I mean, there's so many different reasons why it's a good idea. So to get someone to display a certain kind of behavior, we need to often display that behavior first. How do you stop comparing yourself to others? That's a good question. That's the plague of self-comparison. I think there's an element of there's two things I kind of want to lead off with. There's this element of, I think, almost mindfulness and being present to a situation, right? So like, how do I stop comparing myself with, well, checking in with like, what is it that about that person or those other people that you feel like you need to sort of compare, contrast your own journey to, get some kind of fulfillment or whatever in that way. Um, but to stop, because there's always going to be people out there who are smarter, prettier, better, bigger, taller, anything more, right? So I think for me is for me to stop comparing myself to others. I think one way for me to do that is to be, I'm living a different situation and scenario than them. I'm gonna have a different frame of reference. I bring certain things to the table that other people don't bring. And I think practicing gratitude is also a very important part of this, because it's very helpful, because then you can sort of check in with what's going well rather than what's not, right? So it's like, oh my God, like, and this is a good way to boost serotonin as well, like boost your mood, is to check in at some point during the day and being intentional about it, like what's going on. And for me, I do that at least once a day, if not several times. One part is in the morning, I'm very intentional, and then throughout the day, I check in with these gratitude pieces, because it helps me put things in perspective. Gratitude is helpful for putting things into perspective. So like even little things like, oh my God, like I'm grateful I can blink, I can breathe, I'm able to work. I still have most of my hair. For me, that's a point of gratitude. Um, and this and that and the other thing. And so then I'm able to sort of check in with the unique things that I bring to the table and the unique things that are to my life. I'm never going to be able to walk somebody else's journey or to move through life in their shoes. So it's not really helpful. It's inefficient. And so the other piece to that too is, instead of stop comparing yourself to other people, what can you start doing instead? What can you replace that with? And so again, I think it's the practicing gratitude. I think it's honing your own skills and setting goals and priorities that make sense to you. Because even if somebody else is in a situation that you want to be in, you don't know what they've been through to get there. It's like seeing somebody on TV on the Olympics and they do the ski jump and it's 15 seconds. You're like, oh my God, I want to do that. It's incredible. Like, how come I can't ski and flip over 3 times? Well, you didn't break your leg 6 times over the past 4 years to do that either. So we don't know the good, the bad, the ugly of what other people are going through. So it's almost inefficient and ineffective. And I don't say that as a judgment call, but rather just sort of being cognizant and aware of the fact that self-comparison to others is just, it's not going to help us get the thing that we want to get, right? So I think checking in with, is this helping me get what I need, or is this holding me back? I'm looking through, I'm not making noises just for the hell of it. I'm looking through the chat feature. Like, what's this guy doing that noise for? How do you stop comparing? Any podcasts for mental health you recommend? Yeah, there's the social work podcast is pretty cool. This guy called Jonathan Singer, who's like a freaking dynamo. I mean, it is a little more for social workers, but there's some good stuff that's being said around that. I just started myself. It's free as well, so we haven't gotten to the point where we're like think we're super cool and like we're promoting anything. But I have a Zoomcast called Cubicle Lift, and it's about mental health in the workplace, and that's been going pretty well. We're gonna release our second episode. It's a Zoomcast. We don't have it up on any pod. You get it on YouTube, and I'll start making it available on my website and on LinkedIn and stuff like that. But that's another one. I'm blanking right now, kind of on mental health podcasts, to be honest with you. But those are some of the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. How can I access this recording? I believe it's going to be on the counseling website. I would check in with Josh and others in counseling services, because they'll know definitively. Yeah, counseling.kennesaw.edu. Okay. How do you help others who are struggling if you're struggling mentally or emotionally? Okay, cool. How do you help others who are struggling if you're struggling mentally or emotionally or feeling yourself shut down also? Well, and that to me is about practicing self-care, because we definitely want to engage with others and we definitely want to uplift and help, but knowing your limits is important, right? So practicing self-care means if you're having a hard time, that means that you're not going to be, and this is an arbitrary example, but that means instead of your usual sort of, I'm on the phone with this person for an hour listening to them, I'm going to give them 5 minutes instead, because that's all I have energy for. And being explicit and setting that boundary in a kind way, right? So that could be one way to do it. This is interesting. I don't know if anyone's familiar with 12-step programs. One of the ways, like that's Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Overeaters Anonymous, things like that, right? One of the ways that they maintain sobriety, emotional sobriety, sobriety from alcohol, from overeating, etc., right, is the people who have been in that program for a while, like they are probably struggling to a degree, right, on whatever level. And so one of the ways that they maintain their sobriety is by helping other people maintain their sobriety. So like it's sort of this interesting cycle of like, to help, to be helped. Sometimes it's important to help other people with boundaries, with limits, with practicing self-care. So there is this element of you will probably feel a little buoyant if you give even just a little bit of time that you're capable of giving, physically, emotionally, spiritually, while you're having a hard time. So those are a few answers. Somebody says, yes, I've written several books. Yes, I have written several books. I've written 7 books. And thank you for bringing that up. Just going to go off of that for a second. The Impossible Project is other people's stories. It's like kind of chicken soup for the soul. We just had a book come out. This one is people who have experienced PTSD, and they're like first responders, and some people have gone through some traumatic stuff. It's called Lemonade Stand Volume 3. This particular new one within the Impossible Project series. So I'm really proud of that, because they're not my stories. I've curated and cultivated them, but but they're just people who are a bit like me in their own way. And so throughout that series, it's those who have overcome some big obstacles in their life, coming out for the first time, a transgender man finding love for the first time, trauma, second acts, second chances, various levels of mental illness, trauma, etc. So I'm very proud of that series. And there's other books as well, but those are the ones I think I'm the most proud of. How do you cope with the loss of a friend who recently died by suicide? That is very difficult, because there's a loss there. I would say there's a lot of ways to cope. And so one of the ways is to lean into all the feelings. When I lost my dad, I had my own, and they're not all going to be the same as what this person, I'll call you DM. You're going to almost certainly experience different emotions that I did. But when I had a strange time, because I loved my dad, but I didn't like him. So I always had, I can talk about what it's like, because I know so many people who have lost a child or a friend or a parent who liked that person. So I have enough source material to draw off of. But my own personal experience was I felt angry, sad, hurt, relieved, and then guilty that I felt relieved, because my dad was in some ways my perpetrator and my bully. So I had all these different emotions, and I didn't feel at times that I was allowed to have some of those feelings and experiences. And so that was difficult to manage and go through as well. So I say that to say, allowing yourself to sit and feel that stuff, and try as hard as you can to not avoid those things, because what we resist persists. I know that's a little trite, and that sort of truism thing. It's true though. It is true. Support groups can be helpful. There are support groups. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention does a pretty good job of having this sort of a clearinghouse of various support groups in various regions around the country. The National Alliance on Mental Illness has different kinds of support, peer support programs. They're more, sharing experiences of mental illness, but just sort of connecting with people in those sorts of ways can be pretty helpful. I would say popping into some counseling, I think, can be very helpful, and you get to drive the ship in that session. So you might not always want or need to make that entire session about the loss of your friend, because other things kind of come up around loss. And it's not just the loss of the person, but it's loss of other things that are tangential to that person. and even sometimes opportunities that come up, which sounds strange but true, opportunities that come up as a result of that loss. Like you find yourself in a different place in life and you're like, my life looks kind of good right now, but I lost this person and that doesn't feel good, and I shouldn't be having, you might have survivor's guilt. So so I think maybe some counseling, some group support, reading. There's lots of memoir and books on the topic, whether you want to read someone else's experiences or whether you want to read about it from like a clinical or a scientific point of view. Certainly help point you in that direction if you want. And I know I'm going to share my screen again one more time, because I'm happy to be a resource. And if you look at the top, there's my website on I don't know if my cursor is showing up, my pointer, but the website, my email, and I'm not a counselor, I'm a friend, josh@IamPossibleProject.com, and or there is a form on my site that you can access, and that is an email form that goes straight to my email. So if you need some peer support in a friendly way, or pointed, and that goes for anybody, not just DM, but that goes for a lot of people. All right, so you have on a ring. Oh, I don't have on a ring. So what is the best thing your partner does to support you? File for divorce. That's my smart ass answer. But this is actually, I'll be transparent. I'm an open book. I learned a lot from this. So everything is happening for me and not to me. This is not a ring. I lost my engagement ring in the ocean on my honeymoon, and let's get tattoos because this will be forever. And it wasn't. And it was a painful experience, and I'm definitely running over that and not giving you the full detail on that. But I will say that goes back to I didn't feel very supported from that partner, and there's a lot of trauma that went into that. But I can truly say that my gifts from that is learning more about self-concept, self-esteem, self-worth, and a lot about myself as well. So that's how I'm my own partner at the moment. I'll always be my own partner, but I don't have an additional partner. And so the best thing I can do for myself is empathy and self-forgiveness. And, divorce isn't where I wanted to be. It's not where a lot of people want to be, but it's where I am. And so I got to own it and live with it, and use it to be the better version of myself. So, thank you for that question. I think it looks like it's 3:00. Oh, cool. That's just a comment. My pleasure. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to turn it either back over to Josh, who may want to say, oh no, I got to put that thing up on the screen. Right. Sorry about that. I almost didn't do my complete job. So I think this is something that you got to share. Let me make sure I get all this in the screen properly. But I believe you got to share this to get credit for coming. So like screenshot it or take a picture of it. But thank you, everybody. And I'll leave this up for another 10 seconds, and then I will turn it back over. We'll just kind of close things down. So. All right. Back to you, Josh.
So thanks, Josh. That was a great presentation. Really appreciate you being here with us today. Sounds like everybody really enjoyed it. And so people have asked, it will be up hopefully in a couple days on our website at counseling.kennesaw.edu, which is also the place you can learn about everything that we offer here, some of the supports that Josh was talking about, from counseling to groups to workshops, all that kind of stuff at our website. Check us out. Thanks for being here today, Als. Take care.